South Africa stands at a critical juncture where an opportunity to revitalize its economy and create a more inclusive future. A new World Bank report titled Driving Inclusive Growth in South Africa outlines key policy actions that can spur economic recovery, job creation and poverty reduction. The report states that by focusing on infrastructure, private sector growth, dynamic cities and efficient public spending, South Africa can overcome its unique challenges. And for more on this discussion, we're now joined by World Bank Program Leader and Lead Economist Jacques Morisset, and he joins us now via our video link. Jacques, thank you so much for your time this evening here in SABC News. Very important discussion here when it comes to looking at economic growth, particularly in South Africa, particularly at a time where it is struggling to create jobs with a very high unemployment rate. Touching on those four focuses that this report looks into, maybe just give us an insight there. What is needed to, revitalize inclusive growth in this country?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. I think we have two key messages in this report. The first one, the status quo is not an option anymore for South Africa. And the second key message is for policymakers is don't try to do everything at once. Prioritize, and small steps will make a difference because they will create a momentum for reform. They will create trust on what you're doing. So that's the two key messages of this report. Why the status quo is not an option anymore? Look at the numbers. The income per capita today is lower than 2007 in South Africa. Unemployment rate is over 40%. South Africa, 30 years after the end of apartheid, is still one of the most unequal countries in the world. And actually, the new political climate offers a wonderful opportunity for South Africa to implement reforms and to get inclusive growth. And we propose four priorities, as you mentioned before.
And Jacques, when it comes to discussions around economic growth, we just a few days away to see that budget speech being delivered by the finance minister. And even when you look at the State of the Nation address, we're always being told about when it comes to economic growth, there also needs to be a focus on infrastructure development. And one would ask, particularly when you look at manufacturing, one would ask, it's always the how. How can South Africa see inclusive growth, particularly looking at economic growth in this country, very important for job creation to occur?
Yeah, so you mentioned infrastructure, and that's the first priority in what the government needs to do. If you don't have electricity, if you don't have water, if you don't have transport, it's difficult for businesses, but not only for businesses, but as well for households to survive. So that's the first priority. And the government actually has been taking actions over the last 2 years. You can see that load shedding has not disappeared, but has been almost eliminated in 2025. So it's clearly a good direction. What the government has been doing is what the country has been doing 20 years ago in telecommunication and civil aviation. What do you need to get better services in infrastructure? You need technologies and you need financing. You have both in South Africa. You have a wonderful private sector. We can bring technologies and it can bring financing. That's what the country did in telecommunication and civil aviation, and that's what the country did in energy over the past 2 years. So recommendation is to speed up those reforms, to extend them to transport and to extend them to water as well. So bring the partnership with the private sectors because it can make a big difference in the delivery of infrastructure services to businesses and households.
And, we always talk about South Africa and its policies. And one would also ask then, Jacques, does South Africa have the right key policies to allow for inclusive growth? We're always told that the policies are there. It's just about how do we get to achieving some of those policies?
So you're right. Actually, you have many diagnostics. So our diagnostic is not so different from what you have seen over the last 15 years from the government, from think tank, even from international experts on South Africa. Our key recommendation is small steps. You need to implement, you need to move, and you need to start with those priorities. So what I want to focus a little bit on private sector because, as you mentioned at the beginning, jobs is certainly the biggest challenges for South Africa. Who's going to create those jobs is going to be businesses. And to create jobs, you need to have dynamic businesses. So that's certainly the second area and it's linked to infrastructure, but not only. And a big recommendation we have in the report is to provide competition. If you're looking at the private sector landscape in South Africa today, the big companies were, ranked among the 10 most powerful in 2000 are still the most powerful in 2025, which is not the case in dynamic economies. If you're looking in East Asia, if you're looking even in the US, the ranking of the most powerful companies have been changing dramatically over the last 20 years. On the other extreme, you see that the rate of creation of small businesses, the blood of the economy, the rate of creation of businesses have been only 1/3 of what you can observe in other mid-income economies in the world. So you're lacking dynamism in the private sector. And how can you bring it? It is to open the economy to competition. We believe, and we strongly believe, that South Africa is strong enough to compete, and not only on the African continent, but with other emerging economies. So let competition to come in, and as well make the life of small businesses easy. Don't make it complicated. It's already difficult to be a small businessman. So make the life of small enterprises easy, providing financing and skill, because that's what they need. That should be the focus.
You also talk about really a strong focus there in that regard when it comes to the role that the private sector can play in realizing inclusive growth. But at the same time, what other countries can South Africa learn from? Of course, that have seen they've followed a similar path, and that did realize inclusive growth in their economies.
So let me first make a comparison. So we're projecting that South Africa is on the road to recovery. The growth rate we're expecting to grow to 1.8, 1.9, and possibly to 2% of GDP in the next few years. That's 3 times that what was the growth rate of the past decade in South Africa. So we're relatively positive about it. But the 2% target, even the 3% target that the president mentioned a few weeks ago in front of the parliament, 3%, it's much lower than the growth rate you will find in other mid-income economies, which is above 4%. In successful countries, you have 5-7% growth every year. So that should be the target for South Africa. So which country could be an example for South Africa? So that was one key question in the report. And actually, the report is not only advice from the World Bank, it is advice from government officials from South Africa. It's also, we collected the views of many think tanks and academics and business people in South Africa. But what we did as well is to bring, respected economists and as well ministers from other countries like India, Chile, and Indonesia, or Vietnam, which we have been able to grow much faster in the last few years. So I would say follow the example of East Asian economies, but as well countries like Chile and more recently India.
All right, Jacques, thank you so much for your time and for that insight. That is Jacques Morisset, is the World Bank Program Leader.